1 week camping. When I was 19, I was a venture scout, sort of like Boy Scouts, only for older kids, and it's gender mixed. I decided to go up this 1 week long mixed scout crew camping trip with a friend of mine. But a few days before going, my friend from Venture Scouts bailed. So I'd be going up into the mountains alone with a bunch of strangers, which was no big deal for me. I can handle myself. When I got there, I was the only Venture Scout and the only girl. It was a little awkward, but most of the Boy Scouts were pretty nice and easy to get along with. Although they weren't used to camping with a girl, they happily accepted me as just one of the guys. But there was this one guy, Danny. From the first day of camp, he wouldn't take his eyes off of me. He'd just stare at me. It was a little uncomfortable, yeah, but I figured he was just socially inept with girls or something, and tried to pay him no mind. The next day, while we were hiking, we all got split into pairs, and it turned out I was paired with Danny. He looked a little too excited about the idea of hiking with me alone. His eyes always seemed a little too wide, a bit crazed looking. But he was a small guy, spindly and kept hair, and a little shorter than I was at 5'7". I'd figured I'd be able to take him on in a fight if he tried anything, so I didn't raise a fuss about it. Before setting out to the hike, he kept asking me if I needed help to put on my sunscreen. Even though I kept declining, he kept pushing the question and trying to put sunscreen on me until one of the guys told him to cut it out. While we were hiking together, he kept probing me. "How old are you?" he asked. 19, almost 20, I reply. "Oh, don't lie. You must be 14 or something. You're so innocent. Young, innocent girls are always the cutest." He kept asking innocent enough questions, like where I lived, if I had siblings, what my favorite color was. But then, he started asking me if I ever heard of BDSM. I was taken aback by this, and was getting a little more uncomfortable. So I pretended not to know what he was talking about, all while trying to give him as many cues as possible for him to drop the subject. But then, he started going on about what BDSM was, about tying up chicks, about hitting them and burning them. At this point, I was freaking out a little bit, but I kept my cool. I didn't want to show him my distress, any chinks in my armor, as I knew he'd probably get off on making me squirm. The only thought I could think of was, what the fuck, seriously, what the fuck? As I kept my eyes fixed on the path ahead of me. Then he started complimenting my skin. "You don't see a lot of girls with pale skin? Do you use moisturizer?" he'd ask, attempting to touch my hand, but I kept my arms close to me, held fast to my backpack. I was incredibly tense, and every muscle in my body was screaming. I sorely regretted wearing a tank top, as I could feel his eyes on me. He started telling me how pale skin is beautiful, since you can see the rope burns and the bruises better. The way he said it sent chills down my spine, and the anxious knots forming in my stomach grew tighter. He asked me if I was a virgin, then he asked me if I fantasized about rape, and if I liked to try out rape play. Wide-eyed in disbelief, I turned my gaze away from the dirt path and looked at him. He was smiling, a creepy, childish smile that was just chilling. I kept silent and quickened my pace. He felt too close, far too close. I wanted to run. He could probably see the fear in me at this point. There was no hiding it. But then, I saw another pair of scouts ahead of us. I ran to them, telling them that the four of us should group up and go together. At first they declined, saying that we're supposed to be in groups of 2, but upon seeing how panicked and distressed I was, the 2 guys changed their minds. looking confusedly at Danny, who was silently glaring at them. I was just glad someone else other than Danny was there. The four of us went up to the mountain, and I tried to keep close to the other two boys, and as far away from Danny as possible. Upon reaching the end of the trail and regrouping with the others, the two Boy Scouts offered to switch partners to descend the mountain path. Danny looked downright upset, angry even. He was looking at me as if he were betrayed, but I didn't care if I pissed him off. I accepted the offer of switching partners and was able to get back to camp in relative peace. On the way down, the Boy Scout I was with asked me if Danny was bothering me or something, but I lied and said he wasn't bothering me too much. After all, I was 19. I thought it would be pathetic to get so distressed about some weird 15-year-old kid. I figured that, as long as I stuck with the other guys, I'd be fine. But then, that night, I was alone in my tent. Everyone else got to sleep in pairs of 2 or 3, but since I was the only girl, I had to be alone in my tent. It's always a little creepy, being alone and isolated in the forest, away from everyone else. The scoutmasters insisted my tent be far away from the boys' tents so that they wouldn't bother me, but it only put me in a more vulnerable, isolated position. I sorely wished I'd been closer to the protection of the rest of the group. Late at night, I heard rustling outside. I figured it was just a deer or elk or something, as it usually was, and went back to sleep. But then I heard my tent opening. Opening my eyes, I peeked through the crack in my sleeping bag to see what it was, and there I saw the white of an eye looking back at me. Looking through the opening of my small tent, it was Danny, staring at me. I froze, holding my breath. I held my dad's hunting knife close to me, hiding in my sleeping bag, not moving a muscle, staring Danny down, pretending to be asleep, ready to fight at any moment, should he take one step into my tent. But he didn't do anything. He just stared, watching me, breathing heavily and muttering incoherently to himself. "Are you there?" I thought I could hear him say. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, he left. The next morning, exhausted, I caught naps when I could, and kept close to the other scouts in my group. It was difficult to maintain my calm and cool composure. The scout leaders were a little frustrated with me, since it seemed like I wasn't paying much attention to their instructions. But at this point, I didn't care for it. I was always on some level of alert, as Danny would always creep up behind me and caress my neck, or play and try to smell my hair. And every night, Danny was there, watching. One night, he went digging through my backpack looking for something, but unfortunately for him, I kept all my clothes and personal belongings tucked away with me in my sleeping bag. He left with nothing. I grew up in rough situations and circumstances, so I always felt I can only rely on myself. Asking for help was never an option as a kid. Asking for help meant you're weak, so it hardly even occurred to me. I was prepared to tough out the rest of the week, but a little over halfway through the week, Danny was called away by the scoutmasters and sent home. I got the feeling that the Boy Scout before helped me out, saw what he was doing, and sent in a complaint about him to the staff. As, while everyone else was confused and happily saying bye, he just crossed his arms firmly and stared as Danny left. Danny looked so bewildered and confused by it all, like he didn't understand what he did to deserve being kicked out of camp. It was so strange. I tried my best to forget about it, and the rest of the week went off without a hitch. But the more I think back on it, the more I realize how damn freaky and bizarre that kid really was. I fear he may end up being some kind of serial rapist or something when he grows up. But all I know for certain is that he was very disturbed. I'm just glad my dad told me, although knives weren't allowed at this camp, to take this hunting knife in with me. My father insisted I keep it for protection, and I didn't regret it. My scoutmaster and I, alone in the woods. When I was just 15 years old, I fell in totally love with a scout leader. It was my first crush on a real human in my whole life. Before that, it had always been crushes on cartoon characters. I was the kind of kid who didn't socialize an awful lot. Anyways, I've been helping my local Cub Scouts for a while as a young leader, which meant that I would go to weekly meetings and tag along to the camps and just generally get involved. It was one of those camps that I met a guy called Alex. He was about 25 at the time, maybe a bit older. I arrived at the camp with my unit leader, and this guy was a mutual friend and the leader of another group. We all chatted for a while, and he seemed nice. Even offered me a donut from Krispy Kreme, which I remember because I had never had them before. The first day went by, no issues, and then evening came. The children all went to bed, and I was given permission to stay up late. So there I was, my leader and his girlfriend, Alex, and 3 of his friends, who were all the same age. We all chatted until about 1 a.m., and my leader and his girlfriend went to bed. Alex was being so nice, calling me smart and funny. He laughed at my jokes, and as a dorky and naive child, I thought it was great. He suggested that we take a walk in the woods, and I was tired, but too excited to say no. His friends all seemed really desperate to tag along, which was cool as they were nice. In the woods, it was pitch black, and Alex held my hand the whole time, and occasionally would touch my hip and back. At the time, part of me thought that it was because I kept stumbling in the dark. He asked me to pretend that I was 16 to all the other guys, which is when I really knew what was happening. This was wrong. I was in the woods at 3 a.m. with 4 adult guys that I didn't know. Fuck. I was suddenly super scared. They eventually took me to a shack with sleeping bags in it, and the 3 guys went to sleep. Alex laid next to me and tried to kiss me and undo my clothes. Eventually, he fell asleep with his hand inside my bra. I stayed awake, perfectly still for an hour or so, and then I bolted. But when I got back to my tent, I realized that I had actually fallen asleep because there was a massive scratch between my breasts that remained as a scar to this day. I later found out that he was kicked out from his helper role for continuously taking young, underage girls away from other helpers, breaking the open door policy. I never wanted to sell cookies again. I used to be a Girl Scout. From kindergarten to grade 7, I am now a freshman in college. I was one of those girls who worked at booth sales like you see in front of grocery stores. My mom was the leader of our troop, and at the time, we had about 3 or 4 girls there that day. The parents scheduled to come in and help wasn't there yet. Just my mom and us girls. At one booth sale, in front of a Walmart on a Saturday, my mom had run out of small bills to make change. I was a Girl Scout before you can swipe your card onto an iPhone. We had to make change. and needed to run to an ATM at the other end of the store. She didn't want to leave us, but we promised to stand up further so she could see us from the door if something happened that needed her attention. Now, we ranged in age from 6 to 9, and we were having a lull in the cookie sales for the day. So we were bored and not paying attention as little girls do. We were goofing off away from the table, running back and forth, from one end of the doors to the other, fucking around. No sales made. We didn't talk to anyone. No one approached us. My mom was gone for less than 5 minutes at the ATM on the other side of the store. When my mom got back, she screamed. Sitting on the table was a picture of me that someone had taken with an old Polaroid camera. Yeah, it was like 2006, but a Polaroid, really. It was a picture of me with a piece of paper wrapped around it, an old receipt, I think, that said, "She's beautiful. You're welcome." She never left us alone again. I didn't know why they chose me out of the 3 or 4 girls there. And I didn't know why none of us were paying attention and didn't see someone leave that on the table. It's creeped me out ever since. Creepy guy in Walmart parking lot taking pictures of little girls. Let's not meet. Girl Scout cookies. This incident is a lot more secondhand information, due to not being there, but it was probably one of the creepiest things to happen with something as innocent as selling Girl Scout cookies. I was in a small Girl Scout troop, me with 5 other girls. We were all probably in 9th grade at the time. It was cookie selling time, and you have to pick time slots at businesses that will permit you to sell said cookies. We usually got good business at Stater Bros, so we planned to sign up for some slots there. There's 2 in town, but one of them is what is becoming an older part of town. And with it, the crime has gone up. We really didn't go to the other Stater Bros, not a lot, but since it was in a better part of town, why not give it a shot? Surely, they'd have good business. We had planned out how our block of time there would work. It was required that we have at least 2 to 3 girls and 2 adults to sell cookies. We usually did cookie selling in shifts, so we would have 2 to 3 girls and adults for the first few hours, and then another set of 2 to 3 girls for the last half. Everything that could go wrong did. It seemed like something came up for almost everyone the day before, or the day of the Stater Bros block. There was one girl who was always unreliable, so it was no surprise that she couldn't come. The troop leader and her daughter had to go somewhere. I wound up being too busy, perhaps school-related or something. Regardless, it wound up that the bare minimum of 2 girls and 2 adults could make it. And they would have to be there for the entire duration, 4 hours at least, until someone could manage to make it there and switch shifts. So, they set up as usual: Thin Mints, shortbread, peanut butter patties, you name it. We needed to sell to fund our camping trips and other events. Things were going like normal. People would glance at our cookie booth on the way in. Eventually, they might come buy some when they came out. There was a man who began pacing around the front of the booth, checking things out. He was there for a while. Okay, maybe not too strange right now. It's not uncommon for customers to want to check out our stock and make sure we have their favorite cookie. The man eventually left inside to buy whatever he was there for. Things continued on, the 2 girls asking people as they walked out if they wanted to buy, and the 2 adults supervising behind the table and dealing with the money. The man finally comes out, not even buying anything. He gets close to the table and then shifts his focus to my friends. In a split second, he grabs my friend, I'll call her Kay for short, by the arm and pulls out a knife. He starts shouting and is brandishing this weapon at her. I can only imagine the sheer terror she was going through, as well as my other friend and the two parents. I'm sure as well, this scene is getting the customers and store clerks' attention. Someone calls 911, and eventually the police arrive. It took a while, but finally, after talking over with this guy, he releases Kay, no harm, and is taken away. I was never told what the deal with this guy was, or what exactly he may have been shouting. But it was decided that we would never take our stand to Stater Bros again.